While the world was watching Washington and Tehran exchange diplomatic insults over a collapsing ceasefire, the United Arab Emirates quietly became the third nation at war with Iran, launching covert airstrikes on Iran's Lavon Island oil refinery without a single public acknowledgement. Simultaneously, Tehran responded by creating the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, a formal government agency to tax, vet, and control every vessel that transits the world's most critical oil choke point. This is the story of how a secret war inside a declared war rewrote the rules of the entire conflict, and why the ceasefire Trump called on massive life support may already be a corpse. At exactly 03:17 hours on a night in early April 2026, a formation of combat aircraft departed an undisclosed airfield in the United Arab Emirates. They flew dark, no transponders, no AIS squawk, no diplomatic notification to any neighboring air traffic control authority. Their flight path took them northwest across the Persian Gulf, hugging the radar shadow of the Iranian coastline's irregular topography to stay below the detection threshold of whatever remained of Iran's decimated air defense grid. Their target? The oil refinery complex on Lavon Island, a remote Iranian-administered facility sitting 178 kilometers southwest of Bandar Abbas, in the middle of the Persian Gulf. The UAE had been absorbing Iranian ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones for 35 days. Tehran had fired 550 ballistic and cruise missiles and more than 2,200 drones at Emirati territory, the single highest missile and drone volume directed at any one country in the entire war, including Israel. 13 people were dead. The Ruwais industrial complex had been shut down. A tower in Dubai Creek Harbor had burned. Smoke had risen from Dubai International Airport 3 separate times. And through it all, Abu Dhabi had said nothing. No public attribution. No declared military response. Quiet intercepts. Official statements expressing concern. Diplomatic condemnations. The image the UAE projected to the world was one of a nation under attack, but maintaining strategic restraint. That image was a lie. The bombs that fell on Lavon Island that April night were Emirati. To understand what the UAE's covert entry into the war means, you need to understand the strategic calculation that had governed Gulf Arab policy since February 28th. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, every Gulf state had been struck by Iranian ordnance. Every Gulf state had condemned the attacks. And every Gulf state had carefully, deliberately, scrupulously avoided the word that would have changed everything: retaliation. The reason was not weakness, it was geometry. Gulf states had spent decades building economic architectures premised on neutrality. Sovereign wealth funds invested globally, tourism industries dependent on stability, trade relationships with both the United States and China that required not being formally at war with anyone. The UAE in particular had constructed an entire national identity around being the region's indispensable logistics and financial hub. Going to war, publicly, destroyed that identity overnight. But there is a second calculation that runs beneath the diplomatic surface of every Gulf state's foreign ministry, and it is far more visceral. Iran had fired 550 missiles and 2,200 drones at the UAE. It had shut down the Ruwais refinery, which produced 922,000 barrels of oil per day. It had struck Dubai International Airport, the busiest international airport on Earth by passenger volume, 3 times. At some point, absorbing punishment without response is no longer strategic restraint. It is an invitation to escalation. The strike on Lavon Island was the UAE's answer to that invitation. The Wall Street Journal confirmed it on May 12, 2026, citing people familiar with the matter. Abu Dhabi has not publicly acknowledged it. The Pentagon declined to comment. The Lavon Island refinery was not a random target. It was a surgical choice designed to deliver maximum economic pain with minimum escalatory optics. Lavon processes a significant fraction of Iran's Persian Gulf offshore oil production, feeding crude into the export pipeline at a moment when Iran's economy was already hemorrhaging under the combined pressure of American naval blockade, 73 days of war damage, and the effective closure of its own Strait of Hormuz strategy that had simultaneously cut off its own export routes. The UAE's strike aircraft, which sources declined to identify, though the UAE operates both F-16E/F Block 60 Desert Falcons and Mirage 2009s, as well as the more recently acquired Dassault Rafale, dropped precision-guided munitions on the refinery's crude oil distillation unit and its associated storage infrastructure. Iran's state media acknowledged the attack at the time, reporting that the site had been struck by an unspecified enemy. The regime blamed the United States. In March, multiple Israeli media outlets reported that the UAE had struck an Iranian desalination plant, a report that triggered furious denials from Emirati officials, who called the claims false Israeli media fabrications. Whether the March reports were accurate, mistaken, or deliberate misdirection to obscure the actual Lavon Island operation is a question that intelligence analysts in Washington, London, and Riyadh are still untangling. What is not in question is the outcome. Iran acknowledged it had been struck. Abu Dhabi did not claim it. And the war had quietly acquired a third nation on the offensive side of the ledger. While the diplomatic fallout from the Lavon Island strike was still percolating through back channels, Iran executed its most audacious strategic move of the entire post-ceasefire period. On May 8, 2026, the shipping data firm Lloyd's List Intelligence published a report that sent immediate shockwaves through every port operations center, every shipping company boardroom, and every naval command post from the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain to Indo-PACOM in Hawaii. Iran had created a new government agency, the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. Its mandate, as described in Iranian regulatory filings, was to vet, approve, and collect fees from vessels seeking transit through the Strait of Hormuz. In plain English, Tehran was no longer merely closing the strait by force. It was formalizing its claim to own it, creating the bureaucratic and legal architecture of a toll booth at the entrance to a waterway through which 20% of the world's oil flows. The legal implications were staggering. The Strait of Hormuz is governed by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which provides for a right of innocent passage through international straits. No nation has the right to charge fees for or prohibit transit through an international strait. Iran was not just violating international law, it was erecting an institutional structure to make that violation permanent and systematic, a bureaucratic fait accompli designed to survive any future ceasefire agreement as an established regulatory reality. The American response to the Persian Gulf Strait Authority was immediate and kinetic. On the night of May 8th, Iranian forces attacked 3 U.S. Navy ships in the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Central Command announced that American forces had intercepted the attacks and responded with self-defense strikes against, quote, Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking U.S. forces. The exchange was the most direct military confrontation between American and Iranian forces since the ceasefire of April 8th. No U.S. ships were hit. The Iranian facilities targeted by CENTCOM's retaliatory strikes included positions on Qeshm Island, the same island that had served as the forward staging point for the fast attack boat swarms that had threatened Project Freedom 4 days earlier. Iranian state media reported loud noises and continuous defensive fire in western Tehran as the strikes were executed. On Qeshm Island, Iranian sources reported an exchange of fire with the enemy. What CENTCOM did not publicly disclose, and what intelligence officials speaking on background confirmed, was that the strikes on Iranian facilities also targeted at least 2 of the coastal stations that the newly created Persian Gulf Strait Authority had designated as its transit vetting checkpoints. The bureaucratic toll booth had been open for less than 24 hours. The U.S. Navy had just shot out its windows. Trump, speaking to reporters in the Oval Office, called the exchange of fire a love tap. He insisted the ceasefire was holding. He said a deal could come any day. And he added the phrase that had characterized his entire communication strategy for the preceding 73 days. They have to understand, if it doesn't get signed, they're going to have a lot of pain. The ceasefire did not collapse over a single dramatic moment. It was being dissolved by accumulation, event by event, drone by drone, rejected proposal by rejected proposal. On May 10th, Iran sent its formal 14-point counterproposal via Pakistani mediators. The proposal demanded a permanent end to hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon, a halt to maritime operations against Iranian vessels, the unfreezing of Iranian assets, and, the clause that ended the negotiation before it began, formal international recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Trump's response was 3 words on Truth Social: totally unacceptable. On May 11th, his language escalated. He called Iran's proposal a piece of garbage. He told reporters the ceasefire was on massive life support. 2 U.S. officials told Axios that Trump was now leaning toward some form of military action against Iran to increase pressure. "I think we all know where this is going," one official said. Simultaneously, on the Lebanese front, which Iran insisted was part of any ceasefire settlement, and which the U.S. and Israel insisted was categorically separate, Hezbollah executed 3 separate attacks against Israeli forces in southern Lebanon on May 11th alone. An explosive drone struck Israeli military vehicles in Tyre Harfa in the morning. A second drone attack hit an Israeli Humvee in the same town 3 hours later. A third strike targeted a gathering of Israeli soldiers near the Deir Sarian riverbed in the afternoon. The IDF confirmed all 3. 1 Israeli soldier had been killed in a Hezbollah drone attack the day before. The Lebanese front, which the Pakistani mediators had tried to include in their ceasefire framework as a unified conflict, was burning independently of whatever Washington and Tehran were or were not negotiating. Zoom out from the tactical timeline and look at what May 12, 2026 actually represents as a strategic inflection point. In the space of 1 week, the following had been confirmed or had occurred. The UAE had secretly joined the war on the offensive side, striking Iranian territory while publicly maintaining plausible deniability, making it the only nation besides the US and Israel to execute kinetic strikes against Iran, and doing so in a way specifically designed to avoid triggering formal Iranian retaliation at a scale that would shatter the Gulf's economic infrastructure. Iran had responded to 73 days of war and ceasefire by not retreating from the Strait of Hormuz, but by formalizing its control over it through the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, transforming a temporary wartime closure into a permanent regulatory claim that would require its own legal and military campaign to dismantle. A Chinese crude oil tanker had been attacked near the strait for the first time, a development that brought Beijing's economic interests into the direct line of Iranian military action at the precise moment Trump was flying to China to meet Xi Jinping for talks that included the Iran war among their agenda items. U.S. consumer prices had risen 3.8% as the Iran war sent energy costs surging, with gasoline at $4.52 a gallon, the highest level in years. Diesel was 18 cents away from an all-time high. Saudi Aramco had warned that oil markets would not normalize until next year if the strait reopened only weeks from now. And the Gulf states' Patriot missile interceptor inventories, the physical ammunition that stood between Iranian drones and Gulf civilian infrastructure, had been burned through to critical levels. The UAE and Kuwait had spent 75% of their Patriot stock. Bahrain had expended 87%. Every interceptor fired at an Iranian Shahed 136 was 1 fewer interceptor available for the next barrage. At some point, the magazines run empty. What happens to Dubai International Airport, to Abu Dhabi's ADNOC terminals, to the Ras Laffan LNG facility in Qatar when the air defense systems run dry is not a hypothetical. It is a timeline. Here is the picture as of May 12, 2026. The ceasefire that the United States and Iran agreed on April 8th has been described by the American president himself as on massive life support. Iran has rejected the U.S. proposal as a letter of surrender, and has demanded sovereignty over an international strait in exchange for peace. The UAE, the most economically critical neutral state in the Gulf, has covertly crossed the line from target to combatant. Hezbollah is conducting daily drone strikes against Israeli forces in Lebanon, a front that no ceasefire agreement currently covers. The Persian Gulf Strait Authority is open for business, with Lloyd's List intelligence reporting that Iranian officials are actively contacting shipping companies to demand registration and fee payment. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has expressed concern about its crew members aboard an attacked tanker, and Trump is flying to Beijing for talks where Xi Jinping, who has publicly supported Iran's right to sovereignty and security, will be expected to apply pressure to Tehran on the strait. And in Washington, two unnamed U.S. officials have told Axios that Trump is leaning toward military action. So ask yourself this: if the UAE could secretly bomb Iran for 6 weeks without Tehran publicly retaliating at full scale, what is Iran's actual red line? Is it a second full-scale American bombing campaign? Is it the physical seizure of the Strait toll booth infrastructure the Persian Gulf Strait Authority just built? Or is it the moment the Patriot magazines of one of the Gulf states finally run dry, and a Shahed drone reaches something that cannot be replaced? Comment 1 if you believe the ceasefire survives Trump's meeting with Xi. Comment 2 if you believe the next 72 hours sees the resumption of full-scale combat operations. Because the last time this war moved this fast, 500 missiles were in the air inside 12 hours. And the world was not ready for that either.